Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 12 crazy and insane composers. This is the sequel to 15 healthy and sane composers. I mean, there are really more of them who are healthy and sane than were crazy and insane, but we all know that the crazy and insane ones had all the fun, right? Well, we tend to value the insanity. We value insanity because it's kind of different and, takes us outside of our mundane, quotidian lives. So without further ado, here we have the Nutbags. Number one, Pettersson. Of course, we just finished a whole series of Pettersson symphonies in our fabulous concert programs where we did the entire cycle of Pettersson symphonies, and I can certify that he was out of his mind. Well, actually not. You know what I mean by these things. Every composer has a bit of everything in them. But the qualities that we value, the qualities that we look for in Pettersson are the nutty ones, the craziness, the misery, the struggling anguish and angst and diabolical insanity. And that's what people like. So there you go. That's why we do them. So he's absolutely number one on the list and someone who we've been talking about a lot lately. Next, Bruckner. Oh, yeah. Now, we're not really talking about insanity in their personal lives because most performing artists are nuts in their personal lives. I mean, it doesn't matter whether they're sane or insane clinically. I mean, they just are kind of self-absorbed and difficult people as often as not. We're talking about as it manifests in their music. And Bruckner's music is absolutely loony. I mean, his approach to form, his idea of contrasting blocks of sound separated by pauses, the constant effort to be transcendental with like brass chorales and things. Now, the music is glorious, of course. It's not whether it's happy or sad. Bruckner was not actually a master of musical misery until his ninth, when some of the insanity that he had hitherto suppressed, possibly with his religious devotions, as he approached death, kind of percolated to the surface. And that demonic scherzo and the grinding climax of that final adagio. But even before that, he was out of his mind, and everybody knew it. Everybody. It's not just because he liked little girls or corpses or he had numeromania and had to count things constantly. I mean, he was counting bars in his music just as much. I mean, he was musically definitely out there on the other side, shall we say. And after Bruckner, of course, Schumann. Now, Schumann had the great advantage of actually going insane. That's always a plus in the arts. I mean, the more insane you get. I mean, Smetana did that too, but he wasn't quite as insane as Schumann was. Schumann was obsessive compulsive in so many ways, and his music reflects that, of course. It reflects that in things like the symphonic etudes, which never quite achieved a final shape. It reflects that in his orchestration, which got steadily worse as he got older. It reflects that in his Year of Song, where he sort of obsessively focused on individual musical media before moving on to other musical media. So Schumann, and it reflects itself, of course, in the fact that he had these bipolar musical persona, Eusebius and Florestan, one very intellectual and organized, and the other radical and revolutionary, and they sometimes combined in things like the Davidsbündler Tänze and in his critical writings. And yeah, he was definitely out there in orbit as often as not. After Schumann, of course, Wagner. Wagner celebrated insanity. He was the apostle of the irrational. Love equals death, and suffering and pain is good, and Schopenhauer and all of that stuff, and his absolute inability to believe that anything he did wasn't like the greatest thing that ever existed. That's insane. That's definitely insane. And his sort of religious transcendental art hero German Zeit thing. Well, yes, Wagner was a Zeit thing without a question, and definitely crazy. Oh, as crazy as they get. He was an absolute loon. And so there we have, I mean, anybody who could write, 4 opera tetralogies that last 16 hours or whatever they are. I mean, oh, come on. You have to be nuts. You really have to be nuts. So after Wagner, we get, one of the best, Tchaikovsky. I mean, hysteric homosexual. Yes, that's what you want in music. Who are we kidding? I mean, Tchaikovsky hated everything that he wrote and was emotionally a wreck for the best part of his life. I mean, he had a relationship with an equally insane patron, Nadezhda von Meck, who threw money at him, provided that they never met. Although Debussy was her pianist. Did you know that? It's very interesting in his earlier life in Russia. Anyway, yeah, Tchaikovsky was definitely, I mean, did he kill himself? Did he die accidentally? Did he just have a thing for unboiled water tainted with cholera? Who knows? The Pathetique Symphony, which is the darkest, most despairing piece of music that anybody ever wrote, really. Even Pettersson never gave that one as much of a run for its money. Really an extraordinarily gifted guy. I mean, he was an amazing orchestrator, a composer of remarkable precision, elegance, and sophistication, with a lyrical gift that was second to none, and he was completely, totally batshit crazy. That's why we love him. After Tchaikovsky, Richard Strauss. Now, Richard Strauss was insane the way the Victorians were insane. He was the poster child for fin de siècle German musical decadence, and he loved it. He was a bad boy. He was having the whale of a time doing Salome and Electra and writing music that was absolutely pornographic in its sexual explicitness. And yes, he loved all of that. But what he really wanted to do, and this was the most insane thing about him, he really wanted to write comic operas and be the next Mozart. Ha ha! Like that was going to happen, especially after the way he got started. He never could understand why it wasn't happening. He really couldn't. Even, as he wrote one opera after the other, and they all started like bombing after the last really successful one, the Rosenkavalier. That doesn't mean he didn't write masterpieces later. It's just that his expectations were definitely insane. And so was a lot of the music. He was the ugly, insane armpit of bourgeois German living. That was Strauss, because he was the guy who talked about all of the sexual repression and money lust and really the kind of like creepiness of just being an ordinary middle class or upper middle class German guy. But he was also an artiste, an elitist, incredibly elitist, and a monarchist, and politically completely naive. And his music has all of those things. It has this kind of, well, it's living in another world. It's a fantasy, as often as not. It's something that never existed, but those uneasy elements keep creeping into it, even in his later stuff. It's really kind of fascinating. So yeah, Strauss was definitely nuts. I mean, anybody who could write a giant symphonic poem about giving his baby a bath and having sex with his wife and doing, a normal day in the life of a composer, ugh. If that isn't insane, I don't know what is. The Sinfonia Domestica. He also had a sense of humor. Well, that was a good thing anyway. So after Strauss, Liszt. Oh, come on. Need I say more? I mean, Liszt was just, I mean, he wanted to be a priest. He didn't want to be a priest. He was a virtuoso. He was screwing everyone who moved. His music is totally revolutionarily radical. It mixes the transcendental with the demonic in equal proportions. It has absolutely no sane limits, and it does all kinds of stuff. And he was not a great tunesmith. He was best when he was using other people's melodies most of the time. I mean, what an amazing character. An amazing character. He gave piano lessons for no fee for most of his life. He invented the piano recital. He invented the symphonic poem. He was ceaselessly imaginative, constantly revising, churning out just bucket loads of music while he was running around and traveling. And it's just, you look at his life and you just say, oh my God, this guy must have been crazy. Well, yes, he was. He definitely was, but in a good way. Absolutely in a good way. And of course, then after Liszt, there's Mussorgsky. Well, Mussorgsky, aside from being just a total alcoholic and somebody who was really almost completely uneducated as far as music goes, just expressed his own particular insanity in big, giant historical operas and in pictures at an exhibition. And it just, he was one of the craziest composers. He never finished anything. Who never finished anything. I mean, he almost never finished anything. He wrote very little that was complete. I mean, and these songs and dances of death and the song cycle Sunless. I mean, we like to think that composers like Pettersson and Mahler and all that are dark and depressing and gloomy. They say, please have a look at Mussorgsky. My God. I mean, you want crazy? And of course, you have Boris Godunov, who went crazy. I mean, he was crazy. And so, yes, a lot of his music is definitely walking on the razor's edge of insanity. Yeah, juicy. Russians sort of actually did very well with insanity because after Mussorgsky, there's Scriabin. Everybody thought he was crazy. I mean, he was a theosophist. He was, writing music that had synesthesia, that had color things and stuff going on and wild, insanely chromatic stuff and pieces with titles like Vers la Flamme, like a moth drawn towards the flame, that sort of stuff. And his black mass and white mass piano sonatas and I mean the demonology and oh good goodness, he was just a philosophical catastrophe. I mean, he really was. And his music started out in a kind of faux Chopin-esque way and then slowly went crazy. And you could hear it. You could hear it go nuts. I mean, the poem of ecstasy. I mean, if that isn't nuts, I don't know. At least the trumpeter is nuts in the poem of ecstasy, right? Yeah, right. Okay, yeah. I mean, it's definitely on the loonier side. Let's put it that way. Then there's Alban Berg. Oh my goodness. Now, if Strauss was the poster child for fin de siècle German decadence, well, Berg was the poster child for fin de siècle Viennese decadence. I mean, if you want to make a distinction between German and Viennese, but I mean, just look at what Berg. First of all, there was Berg's, the operas, Wozzeck, one of the creepiest things anybody ever wrote, and then Lulu, which was even nuttier. Oh my goodness. I mean, she's an animalistic female spirit type embodiment who kills people and sleeps around and gets murdered by Jack the Ripper. And, it's just such a charming opera. And all of his music had some kind of, neurasthenic, pathological. I mean, even his violin concerto, which is, a memorial to men on Gropius, Alma Mahler, Gropius, Werfel, Kokoschka, whatever her name was, his, daughter who died of meningitis, which just embodies, horrific suffering and pain and also sexual yearning and luscious, decadent, nightmarish. I mean, in the three pieces for orchestra, that nightmarish march at the finale. And yeah, Berg was definitely on the insane side for sure. And of course, so was Puccini. I mean, while we're in the world of operas, Puccini, whose entire, aesthetic was finding some cute, sweet little girl who's in love and torturing her to death. I mean, that was his thing. That's what he did in these operas, and that's pretty insane. I mean, pathological. I mean, one way or another, it's creepy. I mean, just look at the list of he even called them his little girls who die for love, and he was so happy about it. You've got Mimi, good little Mimi, little Mimi with her gelida maninas, her little frozen, his tiny hands are frozen, and she's coughing herself to death of tuberculosis. And then you've got Cho-Cho-san and Madame Butterfly. I mean, Tosca's not a little girl, but she loves and gets tortured to death. I mean, she really gets tortured to death. Look at Act 2 of Tosca. Oh, well, I mean, Cavaradossi getting tortured to death, but she's not in such good shape either. Suor Angelica, who poisons herself after she finds out her child is dead, and Leo in Turandot. She gets tortured to death. My goodness, she really gets tortured to death. So yeah, that was the Puccini thing. Manon Lescaut, she dies in the deserts outside New Orleans. Obviously, Puccini had never been to New Orleans. I mean, she should have been chomped on by an alligator in a bayou, but this is opera. Anything is possible. So yeah, Puccini had a definite creepy pathological thing. And actually, it had a mirror in his own life because his wife, Elvira, was insanely jealous because Puccini had a wandering eye, to put it mildly. And his wife drove his maid to suicide because she was so insanely jealous that thinking Puccini might have been having an affair with her, which he probably was. But, so art imitates life. Puccini's life was a little crazy, and his music is definitely a little crazy. However, last but not least, the most insane of all composers, and the most remarkable because of his insanity, is Mozart. Now, in the first series here, Healthy and Sadie, we're all talking about Mozart because, for years and years and years, people pretended that Mozart wasn't insane. They played Don Giovanni and dropped the final scene. So all that you had was the morality part of the bad guy getting sucked down to hell, without the insane part, which is the final scene where after he gets sucked down to hell, everyone comes back and just goes back to their normal life as if nothing had happened. I mean, that's the insane part. Mozart, we value Mozart because of his insanity, and Mozart's insanity has been more and more valued as time went on. We don't talk about Mozart anymore as, that sort of cherub, the little classical cherub who wrote music of divine equipoise and balance. We look for the elements in Mozart that disturb us, that 12-tone eruption in the finale of the Symphony Number 40 in G minor. That thing. Or the demonic element. I mean, we love the fact that Don Giovanni gets punished, but no one cares about the fact that he gets punished and morality is restored, because the morality, as we find out, isn't restored at all. But beyond that, there's the disturbing undercurrent of evil that he was able to evoke in so many of his pieces. Or there's Così fan tutti, the piece where everybody is lying to everybody constantly about everything and pretending to be what they're not, and the sensuality and the sexual danger of Mozart's music. These are the elements that we value these days today. I mean, we're no longer interested in the fact that he was just a sweet-sounding little angel, a little kitty prodigy. No, not at all. Mozart was evil. And that's the part that really gets us. I think that may be a controversial pick for some people, because I've seen from the comments already in the previous talk, people who tend to say that Mozart was just the acme of sanity and all that's right with the world. And no, that's not true. You're not hearing the complete Mozart if that's what you think. Or at least that's the current thinking on what the complete Mozart is. Definitely one of the nutbags. So there you have it, my friends. 12 crazy and insane composers for you to enjoy and wrap your own perfectly sane brain around, of course. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.